Hello and welcome to Reawakening the Sacred Self, deepening our connection with our authentic soul. But we have gathered together Indigenous elders, wisdom keepers, spiritual teachers, healers, and inspirational speakers to share their wisdom and insights as to how we can integrate our spiritual practices more deeply into our everyday lives, thus deepening our connection with our authentic soul. My name is Frances Billinghurst, your host for and the creatrix of this event, and I'm coming to you from Kaurna country here in South Australia. As such, I acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of these lands upon which I reside. So mani ngā padne, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm very excited about our next guest, and I would like to welcome Geraldine Moorkens Byrne to this event. So thank you, Geraldine, for being part.
Thank you, Frances. I am very excited to be here and delighted to join you today.
Likewise. So for anyone who's not familiar with her work, Geraldine is an award-winning poet, an educator, and a writer from Dublin, Ireland. She teaches classes in Irish folk magic and traditions through the Irish Pagan School. And her book, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, Triorc, Kiel? Is that correct?
No, no,
Oh,
no, not a bad attempt, not a bad attempt. The first word is driocht.
Triorc.
Irish word for magic is drí, and then in this context, it's driocht ceol, and the word ceol means music. So it literally translates as music magic. So driocht ceol.
Thank you very much for that, Geraldine. Triorc. Oh, I'm going to have to start practicing that a little bit better. So her book, Triorc, is going to be published by Moon Books Pagan Portals in early next year. And this is what I'm really excited about, because it is an in-depth study into the ancient practice of using sound energy, so music and the word, in Irish magical traditions. And naturally, Geraldine's presentation for us today is sound energy in everyday practice, using the ancient power of words and music to tune into the landscape and create connection, which I think we all need to do today. So Geraldine, first, thank you for correcting me on my very bad Irish. And I would
Not
like
at
to
all.
begin, and I'd like to begin our discussions by first having you share maybe a little bit more about your background and what led you to maybe explore the folk magic within your own country, and in particular, its connection with sound energy.
Well, I owe most of it to my parents and grandparents and great grandparents. And I'll tell you, literally, my father was a very, very well-known luthier and repairer and restorer of musical instruments. So was his father and his father. So I was the fourth generation to run our family music shop. It was called Charlie Burns in Stephen Street in Dublin 2. And it was a very famous little building and very much part of the cultural landscape of Ireland through the years. And my dad was also very interested in folk magic and folk traditions. He came from a family that was very much story oriented, music oriented, and he passed a love of that on to all of us. And particularly for me, it was something I resonated with hugely. And I used to work in advertising and media and all kinds of things. And then I joined the family business and I ran the music shop for years. And I retired in 22. So since then, and before, like even before then, like my work took me from, obviously I'm a poet, as you said, so I write a lot of poetry and a lot of stories and so on. And then into the whole concept of being, the Irish concept of being a poet and what that means. And in Irish traditions, that's a fili is the word. Now it's Fili, fada. Fada is a little accent over the I. So the fili had a special status. And then as a poet, that fascinated me. As a musician, the enshrinement of music at the heart of old Irish society, that was another thing that caught me. And bit by bit, I literally realized like how connected my father was, my grandparents, how this tradition has evolved in now, obviously from the lofty heights of druids and fillies and courts, but it really, really survived as folk magic. And my father's people were from Wicklow, even though he was a proud Dub, have to be said, we're like proud, proud Dubliner, but his family roots were Wicklow. And in Wicklow and in his family, every story centered around either, something to do with music, something to do with like powerful words. We have superstitions and little spells called pishogues. And every pishog is about how you got away from the fairies, like how you outwitted something, how you avoided trouble. And this body of storytelling and family tradition that he passed on became the basis for my love of and understanding of folk magic and tradition. And I say I worked for 30 years in the music shop. I dealt with musicians every day. And no better a group of mad, funny, kind, weird people will you ever meet in your life. And when I wasn't dealing with them, I was dealing with poets. So, like, and you realize just like the common magical threads that run through. And then it just became my area of study, tracing those threads, collating them, and trying to explain what Dríocht Ceol is. So Dríocht Ceol, I didn't invent it. Do you know what I mean? It existed, but I tried to bring it forward and show it in a way that people could now access, if that makes sense.
No, it certainly does. And thank you very much for sharing a bit of your background and what a wonderful sort of upbringing you had, because
Oh,
I
yeah.
can speak for myself, because these stories, especially family stories or cultural stories or the myths, especially in this day and age, it's almost like it's an art that's sadly not every child is exposed to. And because it helps the imagination, and as part of your talk, it also helps us form that connection with space and where we
Yes.
are between the worlds. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that as to how these words, these stories that you were told, how they started to sort of like bring you back into the landscape, especially of Ireland, because it's a fascinating
Oh, yeah.
country where it's all full of leprechauns and magical beings that seem to be oozing out everywhere. So was it hard to
Well,
reconnect?
um, not really. I think we came from an advantage in that we were obviously brought up in it. You know what I mean? So there was less of a need to reconnect. But what there was and something I find now, like I deal with a lot of people who are trying to reconnect, who are coming from outside trying to find a connection, whether it's to Ireland or to their own area. You know what I mean? Dríocht Ceol and the techniques involved in it are relevant. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. You don't have to be Irish. You don't have to, it's about connecting to where you are. But I think growing up with it's not just in our families, but it's in our society. Ireland as a society has always venerated poetry, has always like made an exception for musicians, has always made space for that kind of creative sound energy. And we have a huge tradition of it culturally. So you have people singing and playing and orating, but we have it politically. And the two meshed together where you have that like a rebellion that gave us our freedom actually found its root in words. That's where it started, with words and poetry. And people literally, I suppose, reformed an idea of Irishness and what it meant to be Irish, not part of Britain, but Irish, by recalling our ancient past, by writing stories about it, by poetry. rebellion, rebel songs, fighting songs, get the blood up, get people going. All of these things play a part. So we've grown up in a society where all of this is constant. It surrounds us. Children do music in schools. It's very much accessible. I meet a lot of people outside Ireland who are like, oh, I couldn't do music. I never had access to, oh no, that wouldn't be for me. And I think most Irish children have some access to it. It's much more like expected that you would, do some music or get involved. The same with words, poetry, literature. There isn't quite the same gatekeeping that you might get outside. So that's the background. That's the kind of the atmosphere of it. When it comes to the land, our land was taken from us. Our land was colonized. Our land was abused. And our culture was severed. It was literally severed in two. There's like a pre and an after, So there's where our reconnection comes in. Our need to actually reclaim that land. And I mean it in a spiritual way, in a magical way. Not like, yes, we own it now, but is it part of us in the way that it should have been if it hadn't been broken? And that's where our reconnection is, if that makes sense. That we have to lean into how we feel about our land and our culture and our heritage, and also make space for new things and growth. So yeah, that's for me, that's where the reconnection is.
No, so it's wonderful. It's given me a little bit of food for thought because, so it's like where I am, for example, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm on Ghana country, and I've always felt like I'm a stranger in a strange land, that this isn't my land, even though I've lived here for such a long period of time. And I think through, as you were saying, the myths and stories, especially from your history and your lineage and your DNA, that helps you to connect with the land. So while I'm not trying to either supersede the Ghana people here, it's through listening to their stories and then looking at my own stories, then I can feel a little bit of, so almost like a blending for me and me only. But the
Yes.
land is still the land, and that's the most important thing, is regardless of who you are or where you are, it is that connection back to.
Yeah. It starts with respect. And that's the first principle that even in the book now, when you teach anybody about Dríocht Cúil, one of the first ideas in Dríocht Cúil is that in Irish traditions, like magic is a natural energy. It's not like this thing that you invoke from gods or you draw down. It is literally an energy, and it comes mainly from the landscape, is where we would feel it in this reality. So Dríocht Cúil teaches first to sit, to listen. Isteach, take in, take in. And Isteach means literally inside. So you're bringing everything into you. And you hear the sound, the note, the bass note of wherever you are. When you've done that and you approach a place with respect, you're listening to it. You're not going to it and saying, give something to me. You're going and saying, I am here. Who are you? What are you? And sometimes you'll be told to go away. Not every place is for us. The wild energy belongs with the wild energy. And if you're not welcome, you're not welcome. You walk away. But a lot of the time, when you're respectful and you sit and you listen and you hear that note and you try and literally, like you're a tuning fork, you try to attune to that note. You try to hear it and feel it in your, imagine a big bass drum, like right up against your, you feel it in here. When you do that, that's when you know what the land, that's when you're talking to the land. That's when you're hearing the land. It is complicated. When, again, as you say, like when you're not necessarily sitting there with a load of DNA and history, but on the other hand, you have your history and your connection with it. And the land in general requires respect. When you sit and you listen and you feel, that's the first connection. And it's respectful. Then you can build on that, but you can't build on a relationship that doesn't start in respect. We have many people living here now whose families aren't from here, whose parents maybe not even from here, but they're Irish and they are entitled to the land, and the land is for them and of them. And you see, generally speaking, like these people will come to connection with Irish culture with more respect than we do. You know what I mean? More respect than anybody. And when that happens, you see it open. You can feel it open because they're hearing the stories, they're listening, they're taking in. So whether it's literally the land or it's the culture at large, the moment you literally, and I often say to people, the moment you shut up, and we find it very hard to shut up, but you know what I mean? The moment you shut up and you listen, that that alone is respect. You are showing respect and you're acknowledging that this is something you're the one asking. So you go with respect. And the moment you do that, that's where connection really, that's where it begins. And yeah, as you say, it's very hard when it's maybe a colonized land and you know where you stand in that. And but all you can do
Mm.
is as listen to their culture, listen to the land,
Yeah,
feel.
just listening to you talk, and I know here in Australia the Aboriginal peoples do have a term called, I think it's pronounced daduri, and it's that listening, it's that deeper listening, not just sitting there and just listening to what's around you, but really deeply connecting in and
Yeah.
almost like feeling your roots going into the earth and just observing everything around. And for those of
Yeah.
us who may have sort of undertaken Buddhist practices with Buddhist meditations, the walking meditation, where you're being mindful of each step, you can do that where you can sit and be mindful of everything around you. And I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, even if you're in the middle of the city, this is something we can all do regardless of where we are, even when we're traveling. As you said, show that respect, that deep listening, and then we can connect a lot deeper.
Well, you literally just there, you've pretty much described the nugget, the kernel at the heart of Drift Kill. That is it, Francis, literally. Like, I'm an urban pagan. I am an urban chick. Love visiting the country, but I'm a city girl. I'm a Dubliner too. You cut me in half, I'm like Joyce, Dublin's written here. Like, I am a Dubliner. But the city is filled with energy, beautiful energy. We've two concepts in Irish. Brie is the concept of wild energy. So when you go to a place and it has this inherent energy that it gets from nature, and sometimes it's very hybrid, where you'd have like if you stand on the side of a mountain cliff and the waves crashing beneath you, that's really wild energy, very high. But all natural places have brie. Bua is the energy that is accrued through human usage. So if your house would have mainly bua energy. Now, everywhere is a mix of the two. There's little crossover that, but they're two good kind of concepts. And it doesn't really matter what you call them. You'll find that concept in most cultures, wild energy, man-made energy. The city is filled with energy. And it's a mixture of Brie and Bua, but mainly Bua energy. And when you're in a bus or in a crowd, when you can attune to that note, that sound, that feeling, as you say, be extremely mindful and open to that sound energy around you, you can, it has so many effects. I mean, you can make yourself feel better and safer in a crowd. I'm quite neurodivergent myself. I deal with a lot of people who come to Drift Kill because they are extremely sensitive to sounds. And this is something that leads them down the path of exploring sound energy. Sound can be overwhelming. Drift Kill helps you deal with that. It helps you also harness it, control it, change it if you need to. Now, that's not something that happens overnight. That's at the end of a long, like, amount of practice and whatever. But even knowing that the energy of the place where you are, the bus, the crowd shopping, the Christmas crowds out in the market and they're all pushing, being aware of that can help you, as I say, cope with it, but also help you understand it. You can feel the shift in a crowd. You can feel the energy of a crowd. Literally, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. It's not just sitting on a mountainside, meditating, you know what I mean, feeling connection. No, it's people as well. Once you're very aware of sound and sound energy, and as I said, like obviously my area of focus is Irish traditions, but you will find this across every culture. Any culture that ever found an instrument, you know what I mean, or had a poet. It's in every culture. But here we are. You can use that energy. You can connect to that energy. And just like you were saying, even mindful walking, whatever, wherever you are, it roots you, it anchors you to what you're doing and where you are. And that, again, we say it connects you to the past, the present, and the potential of the future. So you have your past, the glorious Philly and the poets, and you have the present, and then you have, well, what do I want this to be? Where do I want to go with this? If you're not anchored, if you're not aware, it's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just sort of, while you're talking, just sort of like thinking about our modern world, how it's so filled, as you said, so filled with noise, but it's almost like it's the wrong kind of noise. It's almost like a very harsh, distracting noise. Doesn't quite resonate with a lot of our souls. But from what you're talking about, when we're connecting with the land, it's regardless of whether it's man-made energy or the wild energy, it's a more aligned sort of sound that's coming through when we listen to it.
Absolutely. And it reminds you of who you are and who do you want to be? Do I mean, look, you only have to turn on the news at the moment and you would be forgiven for thinking like there isn't an ounce of humanity left in the world. When you hear things with with a more attuned ear, when you've become more aware of sound energy, you hear the other voices, the quieter voices, the people trying to help, the people speaking reason, the people advocating for justice. They might not be screaming hate at the top of their lungs, but they are speaking. And then when you hear that, you can amplify that. You can join into that. Now that's a very, very modern example, or a very, very specific example. But just like you said, I mean, if you're in your daily life, you've the television, you've the radio, you've people shouting, you've people talking to you, you've traffic, you've noise. Like, unless you live like somewhere beautifully and rural, the birds singing, you probably have your own noise, your own things, alarm bells, like, having to do things at certain times. When you can hear the truer notes under that, whether it's when you're speaking to people or whether it's natural sound, again, it just reminds you of who you are and who you want to be, and not to be pulled into that loud, brash hatefulness, but to come back and go, no, that's actually not me. I'm not that person, and I don't want to be that person. I want to be this better version. I want to do better. And it doesn't matter how many times you screw up. Once you're constantly looking for that, you'll get there. You know what I mean? We're all stumbling, but we will get there if we can hear the truth. And we talk a lot in Irish traditions about Firen, or truths. And it is that concept that the true life force is truth. And when you can hear that true note, when you can hear the real note, that's what helps you do the right thing. When you're distracted by false notes and noise and distraction, you can't do the right thing. You can't be true and honorable. So you always have to try and hear truth, the true sound.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. And I think each of us will know when we know that truth, because it comes from deep within. It's almost like getting away from the ego self, and it's almost like heart-centered. And then it reminds us that, and if we're seeking it, if we haven't heard it before, it's almost like we're being reminded to take responsibility to turn off the distractions, to limit or be more in control of what external noise we allow in to be yelling and shouting at us. And if
yes,
we really want to tune into that true connection, that true sound.
yes, absolutely. And it comes down to even in your personal life, when you're talking to people, one of the things, again, is stopped listening, taking in under that heading that you find is, and in Irish folk magic, it was a very big thing that you had to trust your neighbours. You lived at very close quarters in a very small community and you relied on each other. So there's a lot of folklore and a lot of folklore about hearing the truth behind what someone is saying. A lot of folk stories that concentrate on someone, we call it someone who's very, I'm trying to think, plawsy is the Irish slang or Irish word for it. Someone who's very convincing, it sounds very, very slick, very plawsy, very slick. So when you are used to always constantly trying to hear the true note, you begin to hear the gap between what they say and what they do, or what they say and what you know is reasonable or reality, and you're not as easily persuaded. So just that whole practice, constant practice of trying to hear that true note, trying to tune into that idea, you will connect to the people who are speaking truthfully. Now, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but who are speaking from the heart, who have genuine intention. And you learn to hear the people who aren't. And again, you're seeing past the noise just to that person. So on the most basic level of your interpersonal relationships, you can practice that. And it then obviously makes it easier to hear the truth in a larger sense, when you're talking politically or societally, but even one-on-one, it's so important to always be trying to hear the true sound.
Mm. And you also mentioned earlier about, again, taking that responsibility back onto ourselves and looking at the language that we speak, the words that we use, because conversations is a two-way
Yes.
street, and we can't always just blaming the other person for yelling or shouting at us. And it's just like, well, what's the message that we are using, and how connected are we
Oh,
to
yeah.
the greatest
And
beings? Eh?
100%. That is, and that is actually that's the flip side of inside is shock, is a mock outside. And that's when you emit what you bring out. And that can be, I mean, there's a whole technique in Driop Cure, of taking, the base note that you hear, that energy, and changing it for magical purposes or for spiritual purposes, whichever, is your need at the time. But the other very important aspect of a mock is, as you say, what are you putting out there? What are you saying? If your words aren't true or honorable, are your words said in anger? Now, listen, I'm Irish, I have a temper. You poke me, you know what I mean? I'm poking back. Everybody has a natural inclination to go, excuse me, get there and get angry. You're not asked to repress your natural self. We're not saying, be a saint and never say anything, but the more you practice listening and being true and hearing truth, the more it annoys you when you hear yourself deviate from that. It makes you much more aware. And then it makes you also reach for better words, where you might just go and dismiss something. It gives you that words to go, well, actually, have you looked at it? You know what I mean? Or be more persuasive or find a better way of expressing yourself. And again, it's practice. But absolutely, the once you start, the that whole benefit just keeps accruing because you become mindful of yourself and what you're doing. You can't control other people, but you can control yourself. And you become mindful of how you do it and what you say and what you put out there. And then again, we're talking about, connectivity. When you connect to another person, even if it's on the most smallest amount, the tiniest bit of, well, actually, okay, I see your point of view, when they can go, well, yeah, I mean, you might have a point. Just that. Isn't that so much better than I hate you?
Mm, mm. We're sort of losing that technique of agreeing to disagree. And it's just like that's fine. I don't have to agree with everything, but we can agree to disagree and move on from there.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. You know what I mean? There are things we don't agree on at all. There are some things can't be tolerated, some cruelties, some injustices. But yeah, I think on the vast majority of interpersonal things, just find that as you say, it's like, okay, well, I don't agree, but I will move on. I will be kind. I will, yeah. And it just there's something there then. There's some common ground as opposed to nothing.
Yes, oh, that's wonderful, Geraldine. There's a lot, I think, that you've shared with us already that we can sort of think about and said how we not only, especially in this day and age where everything's communications, and it's not just our spoken word, it's also our written word, the text messages, the emails, things like even on
Mhm.
social media to think and breathe before you send off that reply. Do you really need to respond to somebody? It's everything. It's all the sort of language and communication. And with yourself being a wordsmith of sorts, with writing your poetry, no doubt words are very, very important. And you have the sort of underlying understanding of, I suppose it is the magic of the words, whether they're written or sung, coming through us to music, and just how they play out in our everyday lives.
It will be the tradition of poetry in Ireland, as I said, starts way, way back, starts thousands of years ago in very early Irish society. And the poet was given a very particular place in society because words were powerful and words had magic. And it wasn't because, they're great, everybody was such a, literary fan. It's literally they were accorded that position because we believed words have magic. And that, as I say, over the years through political upheavals and invasions and so on, that became part of folk magic, where the idea of a word, we have hexing, we have the Glamdicken, the hard word, we have all kinds of traditions surrounding words, we've healing words, these things are so important. And what came along with that was a sense of responsibility. So the poet in ancient times, the Filly, could punish. He could speak, as we would say now, speak truth to power. He could speak to the king, didn't matter. And he could accuse the king. He could say, you have lied. And if the filly was true, if he was right, it was believed that 3 blemishes would come up on the king's face. Now, there's variations on that in different sagas and so on, but that's the basic idea, that there would be a physical manifestation that the king had lied, that he was unworthy. But if that was an unjust attack, it would come up on the poet. So the idea of words having this responsibility, this power, this weight, that they could be used to bring justice, or they could be used to, actually punish someone unjustly, and, that was wrong. All of these things filtered down to us. So for me as a poet, For me, poetry is trying to express as much truth as possible in as fewest words, in the most elegant use of words that you can. So you're trying to convey huge things as neatly as possible. But I
Mm.
think in terms of Dríocht and magic and so on, it is literally that understanding. As if words are terribly powerful, and how you speak to somebody can have a profound effect on them, but it also has a profound effect on you. If you lean into like cruelty and nastiness when you're speaking to people, that will affect you. It will, like, it becomes part of who you are. So you have to treat everything with respect. We use music, we use nonsense words, we use sound energy, but when it comes to what we do, like even a non-verbal thing, if someone is speaking and you snort, or you, you could destroy their self-confidence. You're implying that they're a liar, you're dismissing them as boring. Everything that you do, that you put out, has an effect. And you're responsible for what you put out. So, someone going, well, I didn't say anything. Well, you snorted as that person spoke. Like you said a lot. You said it. That's the thing. It is about everything in the end, particularly in Irish traditions, comes back to personal responsibility. And it comes back to, if you have this ability or this power, you'd better use it the right way, or everybody will see. You will be shown.
Yes, I'm wondering, listening to what you're saying with the if the king was unjust or untruthful, how he had blemishes appear on his face or on his body, how some of our people in power would go down today if that was the case. Maybe
Yeah.
probably not a very happy, pleasant thought to think
No.
of, but
No, but yeah, but absolutely. I mean, that idea that of worthiness in leadership, that has gone by the wayside a lot. And I think that's actually for me is one of the biggest shocks. Like I'm 57. I remember when if a politician was caught doing something vaguely, immoral or illegal, they resigned in shame and were led away. And I honestly don't know what some people would have to do on camera before they'd be punished for it. So you kind of go, wow, that idea of shame and having pride in your honor is gone. But again, then I think it devolves to us all to keep that concept alive. If those in power have abandoned it, that's no excuse for us. We have to keep it alive. And then we have to pass it on. And then we have to see a better generation come after us,
yes,
because I kind of
definitely.
give up on the current generation of politicians.
But it's like the stuff we really need to be the change that we want in the world, that we need to sort of
Yeah.
step up and also
Yes.
hold those in place of power accountable. Because in most cases, they are elected as our representatives, and are they actually
Yes.
representing us? But that's probably another discussion to have elsewhere. Because we're running out of time, but I want to talk about your book because what you've been sharing with us is going to be coming out in written words soon. So could you tell us a little bit about the book? I understand it's going to be out
Well,
early next year. And what sort of inspired you? Because you are also the author of a number of other books as well. But in particular, what inspired you to write about the sound of music within the Irish tradition and share it with the world?
because it is, for me, it's my life work, it's my passion. And it is, I suppose, the area of magic and spirituality that I enjoy teaching. It's what I would practice in my daily life. And it is a very much, I mean, in Ireland, very few of the concepts in the book would be completely new to many people because it is, as I say, part of our society and our heritage and so on. But there is no manual, there is no book, there is nothing accessible for people outside to learn how to do this in a way that makes sense. You can't expect you're in Australia. I don't expect you to know about Irish Druidic practices, you know what I mean, in the early 5th century. Why would you? You know what I mean? So what I wanted to do was create something that was part academic, because that's my background, and that took a serious scholarly look at where this comes from, what is sound and energy, how did it, like, where is its roots, and how did it become Driocht Kyo as we would know it today? But I also wanted it to be, because I'm thinking about Drake Shoulders, it's a very joyous practice. It's a very happy thing. You're making noise. It involves musical instruments and words. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be dry and, oh, I'm sitting in a room. You know, it's a communal thing. And there's so much, interesting tangents, coming off it, and stories from folklore and all. I wanted something that as people went through it, they could actually read and then do exercises to help them. Oh, she's talking about this concept, right? And here are exercises that I can do to do this. So that by the time they got to the end of the book, they had a body of practice. Simple, straightforward stuff to start with, and then at the end, there's more complicated, complex things. But that they can go, I understand this very large area called Drift Kyo, and I now have a nucleus to start from. I have a foundation. Where that takes you, who knows? You know what I mean? That's up to you. But that you have a good, culturally, like, respectful, grounded understanding of where it comes from. And then you can build your practice on it. So based a lot on feedback from students of my classes, based a lot on questions I get asked, based a lot on, like, things people have asked me to do. So, kind of half academic, half practical.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. And as I said, it will be out early next year, 2026. And other things that you have happening, are they all on your website, which I understand is celebratingwords.com? Or do you do other things as well? Because I did mention very briefly that you are the author of other books. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about some of the other books that you have written and that you've produced?
Well, I produced my full collection of poetry that I have published and has been published in other formats over the years, called Dreams of Reality. And that's available everywhere. That's like my name, Geraldine Moorkens Byrne. So I was very proud of that. That actually came out last year, and to be honest with you, surprised me. It did far better than I had any expectation of. So that came out through PPP Publishing in Ireland. But I also I write cozy mysteries and traditional murder mysteries. That's my hobby. And I write the Caroline Jordan mystery series, and I write the Music Shop mysteries. But then under a pen name, Nina Hayes, Hayes, I write the Old Bat Chronicles, and they are the best fun to write. They are a series of books set in Dublin about old women who are Banfassa, Irish traditional wise women who live in a suburb in Dublin and who solve crime and save the day using their very special skills. And they're filled with Irish folk magic and folk traditions, and I explain them, So they're light-hearted things for people who might, have a little interest in Irish folk magic, who'd like to read something, non-academic, non-serious, but pick up a little bit along the way and have some fun.
That sounds wonderful. They're wonderful. And again, they will all be on the website where people can
They
check
are,
them
yes,
out.
absolutely.
Right.
And you can buy them through all the normal channels.
That's wonderful. Well, Geraldine, we are almost running out of time. So just before we go, I'm just wondering if you have anything like a parting message for our audience to sort of help them as we go through these challenging times at the moment. Is there anything to sort of wrap it up and that
Yeah.
you'd like to share?
My current mantra is that joy is resistance. Every time you find joy in something, play that music. Now, listen to me, you don't have to have an ounce of talent. I don't care. If you're tone deaf, it doesn't matter. If you can't string two words together, but you want to put a little poem together, go out and do it. Create. The biggest act of resistance we can do right now is create, be joyful, connect to other people. And the other thing is, they're trying to erase stories. They're trying in many parts of the world to pretend that women didn't contribute, to pretend that non-white people didn't contribute, to pretend indigenous peoples, don't contribute. Their histories are under attack. Your job, if you can, record those histories. Don't rewrite them. That's not your job. Record the people. Record their versions. Buy that book by that Black author or that Indigenous author. Or buy the thing. Support them. Save it until it can be re-established where it belongs, back in the center, back for everyone to enjoy. So resist, be joyful, and listen, preserve those histories, preserve your own history, preserve their histories, so that when all of this passes, and it will pass because it always passes, we can put the truth back center stage and we can look at ourselves and go, well, we helped save that. We kept that. We made that viable. That's our job right now.
Oh, no, that's fantastic. Very much. Thank you very much for reminding us of our responsibility to keep the words going, keep the stories out there in the original sense. So, Geraldine, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's been absolutely
Thank you so much, Frances. I've so enjoyed talking to you.
And for everybody who's watching this, again, to find out more about Geraldine's work, to find about her back chronicles, please check out the link below this recording. And Natalia, I hope you have enjoyed
On
this.
that.
And we will see you again soon. Blessings.